Here at Behind the Mask, we acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the original storytellers and custodians of the land on which we live and meet today. Behind the Mask is a podcast about sharing authentic stories. And in continuing that legacy of storytelling, we acknowledge that we're honouring and celebrating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' traditions, customs and stories. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As I'm talking, sometimes when you're talking, you're not actually looking. So my cameraman taps me on the shoulder and points sort of 2 metres in front of us on the ground. And the man there's dead. He's been shot in the head.
I think we had about 4 or 5 guys on a hilltop that were targeting us, and we organised an airstrike to go and hit these guys. I remember just watching him on this hill, and I was like, these guys are in the last probably 30 seconds of their life.
I'm sitting there chatting away, and as I'm talking, I see a red light shoot up above me. But it looked like one of those flares, like a red light going up flare. It was only later on I realised it was one of the Iron Dome missiles heading towards intercepting a Hamas missile, which is pretty much above our heads at that point.
There were reports of some Al-Qaeda guys that had come into country to kind of help organise the battle, really experienced fighters. Of course, me and my team went down there for a look, and we were in there for about 2 weeks and kind of fighting every day from sun up to sundown.
I'm Josh Pitterman and welcome to Season 3 of the Behind the Mask podcast. This is set to be our most spicy, controversial and thought-provoking season yet. We'll be taking a dive into the esoteric, the taboo and some of the most pressing issues that profoundly affect us all. We'll hear from specialists in the areas of sex, war, business, psychedelics, homelessness, mental health, and more. And as always, they'll open up with their heart stories, as well as the tools and wisdoms they've used to find healing, inspiration, meaning, and purpose in life. Get ready to be inspired once again by the depths of the human experience. It's time to go behind the mask. Between singing, writing, podcasting, presenting, coaching, gym, Pilates, yoga, breathwork, meditation, ice bath, saunas, staying well can feel like a full-time job. Thankfully, Wanderlust Mushroom Multis over here is a craft blend of 7 mushrooms, including organic reishi, turkey tail, and shiitake mushroom, rooted in traditional Chinese medicine. Reishi supports a healthy immune system and may help relieve coughs, while its antioxidant properties work to reduce free radicals. This hero mushroom is also used traditionally to help support vitality and replenish qi. With 1 capsule a day, it's a simple way to add functional mushrooms into your wellness routine. Clean and potent with minimal fillers, you can find Wanderlust Mushroom Multi at your local Chemist Warehouse or order it online now. So my curious brain is so excited about this episode, and apologies in advance, I've had a bit of man flu over the last week, so my velvet tones aren't so velvety. But I'm so looking forward to chatting to these 2 remarkable men. Mark Wales, you are an entrepreneur, a 2-time author, the winner of Survivor, but most importantly, a former SAS officer. And Brett McLeod, an award-winning Channel 9 journalist, news presenter. You've covered some of Australia's and the world's biggest stories, and you've been to certainly many, many war zones. And I'm very excited to go behind the mask of war with you both. And in doing so, looking forward to you guys both taking off your masks. So let's get started with a bit of framework here, guys. Can you tell me what war zones you've been in, both as a reporter and have served in? Just to get the baseline here for everyone.
Yeah. So I started off in the South Pacific. So I think it was early 2000s, Australia recommitted to East Timor. So that was where I first went. That was kind of the first peacekeeping missions Australia had. And then from about 2003 onwards, it was mostly Middle East, so Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon. And I was in the Solomons a bit too in 2003 when they had peacekeeping missions happening there. So it revolved around mostly the South Pacific for me and later on in the Middle East.
Yep. And Brett?
I've only touched on places that Mark spent more time in, but I first went to East Timor just after Interfet went in 1999 because I was a radio journalist. TV, I went to Iraq. I was in Baghdad just after the Americans pulled down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Firda Square. Then Lebanon, 2006, what was, I think, colloquially called the Hezbollah War. I was in Beirut then. I went to Afghanistan the last year of active deployment. I was there around Anzac Day, so Kandahar, Tarankot. I most recently was in Israel just after the October 7 massacre and spent a couple of weeks there. In terms of conflict, not a war but a conflict, Bangkok, when there was the red shirt uprising then and the crackdown on that was one of the other big ones as well.
Yeah, I've seen some of the footage of you reporting there. It's pretty full on. You're right in amongst it there. Brett, I'll start with you. Was reporting internationally in those conflict zones and war zones something that you aspired to do as a young person? Was this?
No, is a short answer.
Really?
No, never had, always curious to watch reporting from conflict zones, but it's not like I ever thought, got to get in there. I was never that gung-ho. I kind of ended up in conflict zones and feel privileged to have been able to step into those places and then get on a plane home, get out of there. But it wasn't something I sought out. I just wanted to tell stories. It sounds like a cliche, but really that was it. And sometimes those stories took me into war zones.
And did you have a say in it? Or were you drawn to it?
It's not like you were ever forced to go. I mean, it'd be madness to make someone go to a war zone as a journalist or a camera operator. Sure. But I don't know many people that would turn it down just because of the chance to do something that here in Australia we are protected from. We never have to worry about conflict of that sort here, thankfully. So the opportunity to go into a place where there's a conflict, and really I'm most interested in the people, how do you live in a war? How do you survive? That sort of thing is, to me, really compelling because it's a situation of there but for the grace of God. And I think all of us at a human level wonder, how do people survive in Ukraine or in Gaza or when Israel was under attack or in Beirut, et cetera, et cetera? How do you survive in that? Now, that to me, the stories I really like to tell.
Mark, what about for you? What inspired you at a young age to join the military?
Mate, I'd seen a hostage rescue mission done by the Brit SAS in London in 1980, and when they'd gone into a building and rescued a bunch of hostages there. I read a bit more about the unit that had done it, found out it was the SAS, and decided that's the career path I wanted to kind of take. And to get there, I had to go through the army to do it, and it took me just years of kind of applying myself to eventually get into the Aussie SAS, and it didn't lead. We had a hostage rescue kind of role in the SAS, but we rarely used it. So it was mostly became war fighting after that.
Do you have any family history in it?
My grandfather was in Morotai in World War II, so he was the only one though. Yeah, fought in the Pacific.
I read, Mark, that at quite a young age, you and your brother experienced some sexual abuse. Yeah, there was a distant relative from my mother's side. We had family in the southwest of WA. This happened, I was probably 6, my brother was 8. I never thought anything about it. Later on in life, kind of put it behind me. But then I've got a 7-year-old now. So after having a young baby myself, I went back to it and just went, we've got to settle this account. And went and spoke to my brother about it, and we went back to the police. And after, I think, 3 years, we went to trial and we were able to get a conviction against him. So, do you think that shaped the choice to join the military in any way?
I don't know. It didn't consciously. Subconsciously, it may have. Maybe,
definitely
protection.
Speak to the subconscious.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's something I haven't been delved into that much to figure out if it was part of it. I think it may have been subconsciously for sure. Yeah.
And something like that is so major that
yeah, and unfortunately more common.
How can it not shape your life in some way?
Yeah, and more common I think than people admit and want to admit. So I was glad to go back to it. It was something that had looking back now, it was a bit of a monster for me in my past that I'd never confronted. I think going back to it as an adult and dealing with it was a good thing.
The same for your brother?
Same for my brother, but also damaging to go back over that history. It was hard.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those things are probably hard either way. If you don't deal with it, it's going to be hard because it's going to manifest in ways from the subconscious that one's not aware. And if you do go and deal with it, it's hard because you've got to meet it.
Yeah, you deal with it one way or another. It's whether it's on your terms or on something else's terms.
Yeah. And that's going to speak to some of the stuff that we'll talk about later. So you went to the Australian Defence Force Academy and then to the Royal Military College, I believe?
Yeah, down Troon,
Yep. And your first deployment was East Timor.
Yeah.
You land there. What's that feeling like?
Yeah, it was just after, it was 2001, so Interfed had been going for about a year and a bit. And it was a state of a peacekeeping mission, technically a war zone. It wasn't too bad. There were some conflicts happening, but I was shocked at how a country could be in that state when it's that close to Australia. It was a really poor, really desperate country, and it's our immediate neighbour, and just I don't know how they got to that point. It was unfortunate to see it.
Why do you think it got to that point, and what do you think it should have looked like?
Well, it was originally occupied, I think, by Indonesia in the 70s. I think Australia we turned a blind eye to it because it was a socialist government at that point, and it was the height of the Cold War. So we did turn a blind eye to it, and I think their relationship with the Indonesians were not good, and there was a resistance that was happening there, so they were not looked after as a population. And I think it was just an internal matter for Indonesia.
And also, from what I saw, when the militia finally left East Timor just before the Australian troops arrived, they just ransacked the place. It was almost, there's no other term for it, sheer bastardry. Some of it was theft. They wanted to take things themselves back into the Indonesian province, but a lot of it was simply, well, if we can't have this country, you're going to have it destroyed.
Yeah.
Your first experience, Brett, is also there. What did you make of it when you arrived?
Didn't know what to expect because I was kind of curious to be around the military. I wasn't there with the ADF, but I was sort of allied, so I had a media pass which would let me go for a ride along occasionally, the trucks, that sort of thing. And so there's part of me which always wondered, what's it like seeing the military moving? The giant beast that is the military. I mean, Mark would know it from the inside out, literally. It's still amazing to see all these men with guns and giant trucks and that sort of thing. There was I didn't see any action, fighting or anything like that, but I did see the aftermath of the destruction of East Timor and just felt immensely sad, and I can understand the East Timorese being angry. It was also the place where I saw my first dead body. I mean, I was in my 30s, so it was unusual for a journalist not to have seen a dead body, but I hadn't. But they had found a grave where a number of bodies had been buried in the weeks before of locals in East Timor, presumably some activists. They'd been executed and buried, and they dug up their bodies. And I do remember distinctly the smell. There's nothing quite like the smell of a dead body. That it's distinctive, and I have seen it and smelled that since. But the first time you think it's just something powerful you'll never forget. But I was fortunate to have gone in there and thought, so this is what it's like when the military's in a place. But it was sometime later before I saw the military and travelled with the military and saw what it was like to be part of that.
Yeah, that confrontation with death is something that you both have experienced at such an extreme level. Have you got used to it?
Oh, never. I can't imagine ever getting used to it. The time that stands out the most was in 2004, the Boxing Day tsunami, what we call the Boxing Day tsunami, a lot of other people call the Asian tsunami. I went to Aceh. It was a few days after we saw all those images coming out of the tsunami, and they were mainly from Thailand because a lot of Westerners there had camcorders, pre mobile phones or mobile phones with cameras. So mainly camcorder images of the waves coming in. we saw other places that had been badly hit, but there was no news coming from Aceh. It was sealed off to the world. In many ways, it's the other end of Indonesia from East Timor. It was sealed off because it had been an uprising there over a number of years, a civil war. So when I went in there, I remember leaving the airport. It was absolute chaos. There was no one in charge of this province of hundreds of thousands of people. Much of the military had actually been swept out to sea. And as I drove from the airport to the town of Banda Aceh, I remember seeing a grader, one of those big things that digs up dirt, construction sites, and it was tipping bodies into a giant pit. The first image I had of Banda Aceh, and I went back a year later for the anniversary. A very moving experience. But I went to that site where they've been burying the bodies, and there was a sign there saying, we will never know how many people are buried here, but the estimate is 50,000 people were buried in that one spot. The province, they estimate, it can only be an estimate, lost about 200,000 people. So I saw a lot of dead bodies at that time, and I never got used to it.
So you're reporting on that. You got your face down, barrel of a camera. And you've got to put on a mask. You've got to appear to be objective. How do you do that? How do you not get overwhelmed with what's actually confronting you and what's the experience of what you've just witnessed? 50,000 dead bodies being hauled into one ditch.
Part of it, I'm sure Mark, you'll speak to this as well, you've got a job to do and it's in front of you. So you have to act on that, because the inner part of me was saying, this is awful, but I want everyone to know this is awful. I want everyone to know, I don't want to make people feel sickened or terrible, but I want people to act. And so I was there, my role as I saw it was to try and tell the world, grab the kind of as many people as I could metaphorically by the collar and say, you've got to do something to help these people. There's no one coming to help them. You've got to come and help them. And that really motivated me. And you're getting by on very little sleep, bad food, if you can get food, but none of us who went in as journalists, and there was quite a large contingent of us, never complained, because there are people outside the door whose lives have been turned upside down. There are people whose lives are suddenly immensely worse than we could ever imagine. So no one's going to complain. You just want to get on with it. And then later on, there's grief, there's sadness. And I think I've become more aware since literally that time of Banda Aceh about the need to let that out, to manifest that.
Mark, after Timor, you go back to Australia. You train to become an SAS officer in Perth. Your first deployment as an SAS troop commander was in Afghanistan. I think September of 2007 from my research.
Yeah.
Run me through that experience, because that's very different to Timor.
Yeah.
Landing there, stepping into your first operation.
We had heard the stories about what was happening in Afghanistan from our instructors that had been there in the 2001 deployments. They talked about the country, and we all listened to their stories, quite closely because we were interested in the place. And then in 2005, we recommitted forces there as the Taliban kind of became resurgent, and John Howard committed another SAS squadron and some other forces. So I was training on the reinforcement cycle when that happened. And I remember thinking, well, this might be a possible deployment for us. I went back. I started doing deployments to Iraq in 2006 and Afghanistan, just like leading some of our soldiers, generals and politicians over there. So I got to have a look at how it was set up. And then by 2007, one of my mates led a troop over there, and there was heavy fighting all through Oruzgan in the summer of 2007, and he told me about it. And some of it was pretty awful. And I found out at that point I was going to lead the next rotation that was going to go through the fall and into winter. And so I picked up with my team. We trained for a couple of weeks. We flew straight into country and started our operations over there. And our first mission was to retake the Chora Valley, which we'd been fighting over for years. And there was, I think the estimates were 100 plus Taliban in there. I felt like there were more, locals than that. But yeah, our mission was to recapture it. my troop was the advanced force element of it, and we were trying to find out a lot of information about what was in the valley, where the Taliban were, what their kind of disposition was, any heavy weapons, because the clearance was going to involve helicopters. So they got my team in there to kind of de-risk the whole operation, to just try and find out where they were.
How big's your team?
Mine was about 24 teams of 6 and then a headquarters element, so we were pretty small.
So they're outnumbering you by 4 times?
Oh, yeah,
At least,
easy, yeah. So we'd patrol behind enemy lines at night and try and find out where they were set up and listen to them, and would watch them during the day to steer where we were going to go at night. This was unfolding over a while, and I knew on the day of the clearance it was going to be – I didn't think they'd stick around because we had that much force coming. It was like about 200 Gurkhas, some attack helicopters. We had a lot of force coming to help with the clearance. And my first ever real combat mission was walking into the valley at night to start the clearance. And by the next morning, we were in heavy combat, and we didn't get out of there for about 12 hours. It took a long time. Yeah. Wow. But it's totally different country, totally different conflict to what was happening close to home. They were super experienced, very good fighters, very aggressive, totally different terrain. Your chance of getting cut off much higher. Like there's nowhere to go in a valley. You're quite restricted. So it was much higher stakes. Yeah.
And did you lose anyone there?
In that first battle, my patrol commander, Matthew Locke, was killed. Yep. So that was probably the first opening few shots of the battle. He got hit by a machine gun, and they were the team in front of me. We were in this kind of creek line, and he'd stopped with his scout. And I only just found this out recently because I was talking to the scout, who was a mate of mine. But he'd stopped with his scout, and they were looking through a gap in a cornfield, basically, and burst from a machine gun, rang out, hit Matt and hit my friend's backpack that he had on, and it spun him and knocked him to the ground. And he goes, that's the only reason he survived, is that he got knocked down, because then the whole cornfield opened up and Matt was badly wounded in that first exchange. So we spent the rest of the day we spent the next hour trying to save Matt, and the next day trying to get out of there. Yeah.
And when you lose a man, how do you as the officer process that, or is there no time to process that?
A similar kind of incident where you know what you're dealing with is bad, but you're detached from it in some sense, because you've got to get all this other stuff done and survive and fight. So I saw it all and said, this is clearly not good, but knew I wouldn't be processing until later if we got out of there. So yeah, I think humans have a type of cutoff when they're confronted with trauma, because if we didn't, you wouldn't survive. You'd curl up in a ball. So I think you can function, but the problem is you do later need to deal with it and confront it and process it.
So Matt's gone down quite early.
Yeah.
Are you fearing the worst there? Is that, we're really outnumbered here. One of our team's already gone down. What's going through your mind in that moment?
We knew when we were walking up there we could face contact with the enemy in a battle, but we'd put a lot of things in place to kind of protect us if that happened. We had like a sniper team behind us on a hill, and we had aircraft overhead, and we had we're in contact with the troops nearby. So we thought, all right, if we get in battle, it will be a fight, but we'll be fine. Problem is when someone's down, your ability to move is quite restricted. So the enemy was trying to get behind us, or trying to cut us off, and it was hard for us to kind of maneuver when you're trying to deal with someone who's unconscious. So yeah, it was pretty intense morning. Mm.
I've always wondered too that the moment you've done an enormous amount of training, you've been on patrol, say in East Timor, but the very first time you actually have to use your rifle, your gun, to shoot at someone, is that automatic? Are you thoughtful of the fact there's someone at the other end who's obviously shooting at you? What goes through your mind?
It's weird because I had read about this. I was a history undergrad and had read all about kind of fighting and the history of it and people's reaction to fighting. But we were so conditioned to using live rounds that there was no, I didn't think twice. It was unusual because we'd done so much of it. And if anything, it was easier than it was in training, because in training there was this extra pressure. It was a higher pressure incident. When it's combat, there's no one over your shoulder watching you. You know what you have to do. You kind of know roughly where the enemy is. It just didn't feel as unusual as I thought it would. Although later there were a couple of times when I think when in the lead up to it, it's quite a tense experience, because you know you're about to be involved in fighting, and the waiting period is the really hard thing. Is like you know what's coming, and that's stressful.
So you're obviously conscious of the enemy as opposed to not having an enemy when you're in training.
Yeah, and your life's at risk. So it's
yeah. But are you conscious of the enemy from a perspective that this is another human being with potentially a family, kids, with a father, with a mother? Are you really seeing them as a human, or are you just seeing them as, inverted commas, the enemy?
There's kind of two sides to it. I think when you're dealing with them from a purely military perspective, they're just threats. And I think, and that's how you got to think and operate when you're in a war. But I think the old me, or the kid that I was growing up, you do think about that later on. And I remember there was one time I think we had about 4 or 5 guys on a hilltop that were targeting us, and we organised an airstrike to go and hit these guys. I remember just watching them on this hill, and I was like, these guys are in the last probably 30 seconds of their life. And it's just a weird endeavour. I think, and this is the point I keep going back to when I talk about this stuff, is committing our young people to a war is such a serious thing. You've got to really think about what you're doing, because it affects so many lives in a not positive way.
Brett, beyond just being in a war zone, reporting from it, and the inherent risk that comes with that, you made it really clear that you just loved to share stories. You want to tell these stories. Do you ever consciously putting yourself in more harm's way to get the story you need, or you want, or you feel like will make better television?
Not consciously, no. I have a yellow streak, a yellow streak down my back.
Yeah,
and their journalists can't tell stories, so there's no point putting you in a place that's too risky. It's always a calculated risk, because you're in a conflict zone, so you've got to kind of think about your situation. But, sometimes in the heat of the moment, I've done things where later on I thought, well, that was a bit risky. Why did I do that? Mm-hmm. I'm sure, Mark, you've done that.
A little bit.
Yeah. I remember doing in Lebanon, we're having dinner one night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I heard this loud thud. We're in Beirut. Southern Beirut's controlled by Hezbollah, so there's a no-go zone for the media unless they escort you in. But there was a massive thud as Israeli missiles are coming in. We're so close, we thought that's got to be on the border. I think we can get there. So raced out with my camera crew and drove to the scene, and there'd been a 10-storey building, which is now a smoking hole in the ground. I think there were 20 or 30 people inside. So quickly did a very quick piece to camera just while there's people behind there literally digging with their hands. And then got our shot, walked away, and then my cameraman, Kane, turned back and said, look where we were standing. And the blast, the missile, of course, damaged all the buildings around it. And we were standing under a giant piece of concrete, sort of, 3 metres by 4 metres, hanging on by one thread from the side of a building. One piece of metal was just there. It could have fallen down at any point, but we didn't even look up. We just looked at what was behind us, the piece to camera.
Wow.
So,
Dude, I saw you sent me some footage recently. I saw a clip from the Today Show. You're in Israel, and it's sort of interrupted by Hamas Iron Dome explosion overhead, and cuts back to the team in the studio, and I just was watching it. I was just like, holy shit. Like, holy shit. What were you feeling in that moment?
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It was Today's show, 5:30 in the morning, Melbourne time, and sometime in the evening, Israeli time, right on the border of Sderot, which is on the border with Gaza. Closest point we could physically get. And I'm doing a live cross, and I do remember, you talk about decisions you later think, was that wise? We had an excellent security guy with us, SAS, really good guy, medic. And it had been pretty quiet all day, and I said, do you reckon I can get by without my helmet for this cross? He said, look, we haven't seen any missiles all day, so give it a shot. And of course, that's the time I'm sitting there chatting away, and as I'm talking, I see a red light shoot up above me, but it looked like one of those flares, like a red light going up flare. It was only later on I realised it was one of the Iron Dome missiles heading towards intercepting a Hamas missile, which is pretty much above our heads at that point. So as I'm chatting away, I look up, see the red light, and then crack. And all these alerts start going off. So I just say, times like that, under stress, I go really quiet. Some people shout, I go quiet. That's just my way of responding to stress. So I just say, got to go, and jump down into a berm that had been put there and just lay down with my hands over my head where my helmet should be. Luckily, no one was injured. It was just, a bit of a hairy moment, and half an hour later, you're back on air.
Yeah, and you were, but Carl Stefanovic's face, you could just feel his sort of horror and his concern for you, and it was. I mean, watching it, I was sort of blown away, and that's not a great description, but do you feel scared and fearful a lot in those in the job that you do?
Probably more, actually, very much what Mark's saying. It's leading up to something.
Yeah.
It's the unknown, isn't it? When you're approaching a
Fear of the unknown
task.
Anticipation,
Don't know all the ins and outs, and that's when you think, well, this could happen, this could go wrong. I'm not a worrywart, but I think I'm responsible, not just for me. I've got a very small team, but I'm responsible for them as well, because going to make sure everyone's safe. And then there's to quote Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns. What don't I know about this that I can't find out until it actually happens? So that plays on your mind for sure.
But when you're in it, you're just responding to whatever is happening, and
totally focused on what's in front of me.
Yeah.
I had that. I think I may have sent you the incident in Bangkok when it was the red shirt uprising, and
you're right there,
right in the middle of it. At least I hadn't planned to be, but there we were, and we're next to the protesters. About 2010, middle of Bangkok, an area like CBD, nice area. Protesters have been there for a few weeks. The military decided it's time to crack down. So they're coming in force, soldiers, there were tanks coming down the street and just shooting, indiscriminately, shooting down the street. So my team and I just sort of backed against a corner, and I at that point got a phone call from, it's actually ABC Radio, who I don't work for, but occasionally I've done crosses for them. So I'm thinking, this is not the time to do it. Then I thought, actually, no, this is the time to do it. I'm going to describe what's going on. So I'm describing what's going on. People are running. As I'm talking, sometimes when you're talking, you're not actually looking. So my cameraman taps me on the shoulder and points sort of 2 metres in front of us on the ground, and the man there's dead. He's been shot in the head. I think he was a journalist. Could have been a fixer.
Right up against a pillar.
He was laying on the ground behind the narrowest tree in the world, like the worst place to be lying down. But I think people panic, So I could see, he'd been shot in the head. And I just said at that point, I'm not a journalist now. I'm a human being. I got to get out of here. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. So I said, I think we're in trouble, got to go, and hung up. And then we did have to run because a media pass then gives you no protection. No. So one of the protesters helped get us out of that area because I quickly assembled my team and said, we've got to go, but I don't know where we can go. There were walls all around us. And the street in front of us, which is having bullets fired down it, sort of pinging off the ground. And luckily a protester came over here. And I think he literally said that line from Mad Max 2, you want to get out of here? Follow me. And we did. And we jumped over fences. Trouble is when you jump up, we went up to the next level of a car park and we're standing on the roof of a car park, totally exposed. There were snipers up there. Shit. So we ran around until we turned around a corner, caught our breath, made sure we were all okay. And then one of the best things was we had about a half-hour walk to get back to the office we were using. So we talked amongst ourselves. And there was one of the, an Australian guy, I wish I could remember his last name, John was his name, was acting as a second camera for us. And we talked about the guy who died, and he said, he would have got up this morning. He was just a protester, brushed his teeth, maybe said goodbye to his wife and kids, and now he's dead, and it's not even 11 o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
It was a really apt thing to say.
Mm.
Yeah.
And on that, pull on that thread, you get a call, you need to go international, whether it's Bangkok, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Israel, whether it's Afghanistan, Timor, wherever it is, and you have to say goodbye to your family.
Mm.
How do they deal with it?
Very quickly, most of the time, because it happens quickly. We really have time to
How do
prepare
they deal
for
with it
these
emotionally?
things. My wife has said she tends to not watch what I'm doing. And a lot of the time I've done this is when I've actually been based in London. So 20 years ago, she couldn't see what I was doing. Now she can, but I don't think she seeks it out. I think she kind of just puts it aside. We talk every day. I tell her what I've been up to. I don't give her any unnecessarily difficult details. So I think that for her is a way of dealing with it.
So does she worry for you if you're not the worrywart?
She never says if she does. I think she does, but a way of processing it is not to be overly worried. I mean, I'm a grown-up. I can handle myself as best I can in those situations.
You got kids?
3. They're all adults now.
Yeah. And what about them with dad?
They've had times, it's funny that we've never kind of sat down and talked about it as a family, but they've had
You
times.
might after this episode.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I do remember them saying at my 60th birthday last year, they all gave a little speech, which is just beautiful. But they had talked about the times where, Dad's off to a war zone again. Hope he's okay. But again, they were young enough then, pre sort of the internet being really as popular as it is now. I was out of sight, out of mind. So I'd just be gone for a couple of weeks, then come back. I think in reflection, they were kind of, he was in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, it's might not be one of those things that unless dad goes and doesn't come back, that there's a realization of what may happen.
Yeah.
And those stories happen too. We lose journalists and reporters
Over 100 a year.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Have you ever lost any colleagues?
Not in conflicts. Not anyone. People I know of, but no one I know personally.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
That's
touch wood.
wood. We've all got a heart story to tell, don't we? The one that lives behind the many masks we wear. On this show, you get to hear those stories from our incredible guests who come on each episode and share theirs. Now it's time I shared mine. Last year was the hardest one I've faced in my life and career. There were 2 vocal surgeries, a high-speed, near-death experience, and the ongoing health struggles of my father. It felt like the most appropriate time to put pen to paper. The Behind the Mask book is memoir meets self-development, an opportunity to share the wild, honest, funny, and at times very vulnerable anecdotes of a career in showbiz, intertwined with the lessons, learnings, and wisdoms I've gained along the way. I share my struggles with anxiety, imposter syndrome, health battles, eating disorders, and that feeling of not enoughness. Most importantly, I share how I moved through it. My intention is not only for you to really meet this human being beyond the many iterations of human doing, but to help you navigate your way through life with a deeper sense of self, meaning, and purpose. I truly hope you come along for the ride and grab yourself a copy. The book is available at online stores or in stores, but I recommend purchasing through the great people at Readings. Head to readings.com.au to get your copy. Mark, you obviously have had some fairly intense operations.
Yeah,
A couple against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. There's one that you talk about, I think it's in Durawood.
Yeah.
I would love you to speak to that operation because I think our listeners need to know what happened there.
Yeah. We this area.
It's sort of southern part of Afghanistan.
Yeah, this is towards the winter in Afghanistan. There was one particular area we hadn't been to in, I think, a couple of years, but the Taliban controlled it. It was on the Helmand River. Pretty dangerous spot. And there were reports of some Al-Qaeda guys that had come into country to kind of help organise the battle, really experienced fighters. Of course, me and my team went down there for a look, and we were in there for about 2 weeks and kind of fighting every day from sun up to sundown, pretty much every day. Like I'd sit down after sundown a couple hours after and try and write out the contact reports from that day. And I just didn't know where to start because we'd start fighting in the morning and just it would go all day. And so it was at the end of that tour, and it had been a hard tour. And I remember thinking this could be the last job. I mean, I remember thinking that quite a few times just because of how many of them there were and the sort of weapons they were using. So it was really high stress. It was a hard thing to get through because I was the team leader. I didn't want to go through what I'd been through in Chora where we'd lost a soldier. So we're trying to fight pretty smart. And it was the end. It was the end of what I could take as a leader, I think, after a tour like that. It was really difficult. And I think once I got home, we got through that 2 weeks. Everyone survived. We hit a lot of enemy, and all along those riverbanks, and they were shooting at us all with all their heavy weapons all day. And these were from positions they'd used to fight the Russians from. So they were intergenerational fighters. They were using the same weapons, and we had to throw back everything we had at them. And yeah, by the end of it, I was totally burned out. And I remember going back into the base, and a guy I knew from Commando saw me and he goes, "You all right?" And I said, "No, no, I'm not all right." And he didn't tell me that until maybe a year or two ago, and we had a laugh about it. But yeah, I remember going home after that.
You don't remember saying that to him?
I don't remember saying that or even seeing him. There's certain things I don't remember from that period, which I've had people come up to me later and go, "Oh, do you remember talking to me at this ramp ceremony?" And that'd be a friend of mine. I'm like, "I don't remember it, man." And it was just like, because there were so many things happening that were kind of memories that just seemed to steamroll every other little thing that happened next to it, if you know what I mean.
Have you ever sort of dug deeper into that? I know you've seen a psych. Have you ever talked about like what you detach from, that stays in the conscious mind, what leaves it due to the amount of trauma and intensity of what you're experiencing in a moment?
There were some things and I remember because I did psychotherapy about years later, and one of the techniques they use is called prolonged exposure, where they take you back through an incident repeatedly, which is about as much fun as it sounds, but it's quite effective for reducing symptoms. But I remember talking about that incident with Matt a number of times, and then I started remembering details that I had forgotten, just about trees and what was in front of me, and seeing certain things move, all these tiny details that I just couldn't remember, but I remembered kind of years later. So, yeah, it's a pretty surreal experience to get through it all. And then we flew home, and I was in Perth trying to recover in society after that. It was a long road.
Yeah, so tell me a bit more about that when you say I was trying to recover. Well, obviously there's dreams or images that haunt a man. You know,
nightmares, couldn't concentrate, couldn't socialise, was hiding in my apartment. Just classic things you see in someone who's been through that type of an experience.
Classic PTSD.
Classic PTSD. And it's not something I wanted to admit to because I wanted to keep working, and the culture wasn't really accepting of it at that point.
Did you know in yourself that you're experiencing PTSD? Could you label it yourself?
No, I kept trying to push it aside. I'll just keep going and this will go away, and it just didn't go away. And I think after a while I'm like, okay, something's definitely wrong because I've never encountered these symptoms before. Maybe a little bit after East Timor, but not as serious as this. And so, yeah, I had to go to a psychiatrist, go and get psychotherapy, do all the things that I really didn't want to do to try and get to a level of functioning that would just let me get up in the morning and go to work at least. So it started with that. but the recovery took years, took me a long time.
Do you feel like that's the bravest thing you did?
It's definitely one of the hardest things I've done.
We talk a lot about bravery in war and but what does bravery actually mean to you?
I think something I've seen over the years is that physical bravery is not that uncommon, but things around morality, that child sex assault one took a lot more courage. I think taking charge of my recovery took a lot more, or admitting that I was having difficulties took a lot more courage. I think it comes from places you don't expect, but that to me took a lot more personal courage than being in a war zone and, being around physical danger. Yeah.
Do you think it speaks to the system, or does it speak to what it is to be a man?
Well,
what we expect a man to be.
What we celebrate in culture is a lot of physical courage, right?
Yep.
And to some extent, I think other forms of courage, but the easiest thing to show and demonstrate and celebrate is that physical courage, whether it's athletes or martial art, whatever it is. But the really difficult things.
Winning survivor.
Exactly, yeah. But the really difficult things are those small personal issues that you don't want to confront, that you tuck away and you have to revisit later. I think that takes a lot more courage.
Was there a big shame story for you that you had to, or sort of?
I don't think shame's the right word.
Did you feel embarrassed? Did you feel?
It's not shame. It's fear. It's
the
fear. It's like you don't want to go back to something that was difficult. It's just hard. And I think that's when you
put it in a closet, lock it away.
Lock it away. Don't deal with it. Or move on. I think it's fear more than shame. But shame is part of it. But I think for me, it was more fear.
Well, thank you for sharing that, mate.
Actually, you reminded me, having dealt with it, being so public about your own journey with PTSD, which is incredibly commendable. I did get to know Frank Ochberg, who was the doctor who literally helped define PTSD.
Really?
Back in the 1980s, because it wasn't called that until they gave it a name. He and two other psychiatrists from America decided they wanted to get this in the DSM, which is the Bible for psychiatrists. So he said, and it was mainly dealing with veterans that made them specialise in this area, but he said that PTSD is something where you don't dial it up, it dials you up. And he described it this way, where you're not thinking, remember that time I was in a firefight? It comes back to you, and you're in the firefight again. Is it? Would that be right?
Yeah. It triggers the same feelings that you have when you're in that, whatever that traumatic incident was, and it's there for a reason. It's there to protect us in the future from, to avoid that sort of trauma. But
it's survival.
It's survival. But the problem is, it doesn't. If you carry it for too long, it gets in the way of your life and everything.
Yeah, it's where we sort of draw this line between survival and suffering.
Mm.
The mind can continue suffering so much, even if it's all there as a protection mechanism for what's in the subconscious or the unconscious. It speaks to Schwartz's work, which is a parts work, where there's a part of us that is actually protecting the other more traumatic part. But that traumatic part, whether you want to call it your shadow self or whatever you want to call it, is always going to come out in some way, even if you feel like you've chucked it in a great chest and you've put 1,000 padlocks on it, and it just finds a way to seep out and affects your life. So, I mean, that's a really brave thing you did to go and confront that. What were those sessions like?
Oh, I used to hate it. I used to drag my feet. I never wanted to go. I'd find excuses to not go.
Really?
I didn't want to go near it. But I think, again, the worst bit's kind of waiting for it. Once you're there and you're talking to someone, it's actually fine. It's just that you just don't want to go back to it, really. I'd rather be doing anything than sitting in an office talking to a psych. I'd rather kick a footy or, read a newspaper. But it's good for you, so you should do it.
Were there other things that you felt like, other than kicking footies, to sort of detach yourself from it? Did you ever become addicted to anything in order to numb yourself from feelings?
We drank a lot in the army. There was already a drinking culture there, and I just did more of it. So I think, and that's a really unhealthy response to it. But it's also at a point where I wasn't fully aware of what I was dealing with. And I think over time, once I realised it was PTSD, then I took the drinking a lot more seriously and wound that down to virtually nothing. But it's common. It's a common thing. People have self-medicate to get around these things rather than go to a psych. So that was part of it. But also you can channel into better things. Like I started doing things like started surfing with my mates. So I do surf trips, and that was quite healing. I went to business school in the US, started doing a lot more CrossFit, did a bit of boxing. So just like sports and activities that would take your mind totally off everything else and be a healthy outlet. That was good.
A healthy outlet, yeah. Were there times or things that you brought into your life for introspection rather than for, whether it's healthy or not, that would want a better word, distractions?
Like what do you mean?
Journaling, meditating.
Yeah, journaling and meditation was recommended to me by
one of the psych.
One of the psychs, yeah, a really good guy who dealt with soldiers, but also some of our intelligence officers. And he goes, look, just write in a diary. It can be anything you want. It doesn't have to be Dear Diary. Just talk about your day. Just write it down. Do some breathing exercises at night. Just be present, be mindful. It was just a centering kind of activity that there's a lot of research behind it working. So I did practice that for a while. Haven't gone back to it. Probably should, but yeah, it definitely works.
One of the things I'm always fascinated about, obviously I'm in music. It's a big part of my life. So sound is always a big part of my life. And so obviously you're seeing a lot, but you're hearing so much in war, like especially these big battles and whatever you're experiencing. When you leave it, what's the experience of silence like for you?
I think one of the things that I started to feel when I was training a lot in the SAS is you hear sounds, but you actually feel them. You feel them as well because there's so much of it's blast or gunfire or intense noises. And I think, and in combat, it's even more intense because sometimes you don't have earmuffs, and it's just noise is a big part of conflict and obviously. But for me, coming back from it and not being exposed to it was super unusual. You're conditioned to it, but it also never leaves you. Like even now, if I'm in a place that's super loud, it's triggering is not the word, but it gives me makes me uneasy. And it's just because it's so wired into my response systems that body doesn't quite know what to do when it hears loud noise. Doesn't know if it's safe or if it's just a plate being dropped or if it's a gunshot. You kind of get the same response. So it's so ingrained in your neurological makeup over time that it's kind of rewiring. It takes a bit of work. It takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of work.
So you're watching the couch. You're watching the TV. You're on the couch, and someone in the kitchen accidentally drops a plate. What's your reaction? What happens?
Oh, I'll jump, like physically jump, and turn around and look at it. And it's just because it's in that moment your body thinks it's a threat. You know it's not.
Heart rate?
Oh, a little bit, yeah, a little bit of a jump, and it's just years and years and years of dealing with gunfire and explosions, and it's still there. It calms down over time, and I think it's hypervigilance they call it. Anyway, it calms down over time, but it's still there even years later.
So it's the idea that war never leaves you.
I don't think so. I don't think anyone who experiences it is marked in some way, and to varying extents. But I don't think it's something you can walk away with and just see it and not experience something from it long term. Some of it's positive too, like kind of Brett was saying. Some of it is, I'm lucky. There is a lot of growth that comes from it as well. So got to take some good, I guess.
Well, it shaped you in becoming the man you are today.
It took away a lot of fear later on. I was like, well, I'm lucky to be alive. So does it really matter if I apply for business school and don't get it? Or does it matter if I try and take off on a wave that's a bit bigger than I normally take off on? Like, you just don't worry about that stuff as much now. And I didn't worry about being failing or being embarrassed anymore because I was lucky to be alive. So it changed the way I behaved, probably for the better, yeah.
Mm. You speak so openly, so vulnerably about your experiences. You share that in your book, Survivor. You've also got another book out, Outlander, which isn't a memoir. Survivor is a memoir. Outlander is a more, like I sort of described it as semi-dystopian look at the world, in particular Australia, and a civil war that breaks out and what happened. But what in your first book, why did you choose to speak, and why do you choose to speak so openly and so vulnerably about your experiences? What's your hope for it?
I remember when I was writing at one point thinking if you don't go into some of these areas and doing it for a reason, not just for the sake of it, but if you don't go into some of these really uncomfortable areas, it's not going to be worth reading, because people, if they want a history of Afghanistan or a conflict, they can get it from somewhere else. But if you want to share the human experience of being a soldier, because before that you're a child and you grew up in Australia and then you came home as a child again, you've got to be honest about it. So that was a bit of a turning point for me. It changed the way I told the story. I was a bit more open about things because I thought it would help.
Do you feel like it's impacted others in a way?
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of people who are like, as a family member, my husband went through this and this helped me understand it. Like just little, or people saying, I grapple with my own issues after deploying for years. I'm now going to do something about it. So it has helped. It definitely helped people. I get a lot of nice messages about it.
Look, there's so much going on with regards to classified information. I don't know how much you guys, get to talk to the military. How much of what you're reporting on is all the news or just the news that you can share?
With anything, you're always careful to protect confidences, and we rely a lot on background. And that can be background that's come from the government, occasionally with the military, but also people's personal lives.
Yep.
Like you might agree to interview someone about a particular issue and they say, yeah, but I don't want to talk about my marriage breakup. And you say, okay, well, fair enough, because I'm talking to you about the fact your house has been broken into. So that's just one example. But yeah, you always protect your sources and confidence. The danger is if it crosses a line where you're no longer being a journalist, you're just sort of being a PR for whoever. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's always a bit of a delicate balance.
I'm just wondering whether you're getting classified information that you go, I can't share it, but now on this podcast you go, yeah, that was 20 years ago. We can get.
No,
yeah, they said this to me. We weren't allowed to say it, and now here it is.
Look, the only stuff I would have had like that is, say you're travelling. I don't travel, as I said before, I haven't travelled with the military a lot, but I've been around the military.
That's what I mean. Like,
when you're travelling, with them. You can't give away where you are, troop numbers, that sort of thing, which is one of the reasons I prefer to be travelling outside where you can say I'm in Tarankot or I'm in Baghdad. I met journalists who travel up with the British military up to Baghdad in 2003, and they said it was so frustrating because we couldn't even say how big was our convoy or even roughly where they were.
Yeah.
But someone travelling in a beaten-up Toyota Crown, like I was, could say that.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more limiting. But I want to say too, Mark, that your talk about the going through therapy, I'm a big proponent of it. I think it's just so important, particularly in my line of work, your line of work, everyone's line of work, particularly when you're dealing with people who are traumatised. Because trauma, we get vicarious trauma. You're around people who suffered a lot, then that can affect you, and you might be traumatised without realising it. Very common amongst journalists.
Yeah. So what's the process for journalists in terms of meeting that trauma, preparing for it? What systems and tools are in place for journalists?
Well, I've always been involved since a young age I've always been interested in psychology, so I majored in it at university. I had a difficult childhood. By the time I was 8, I was an orphan. I'd lost both my parents by the time I was 8, both to cancer. So that obviously affects you. And it was a long process of discovering how that affected me, because I realised most of my life I've really been in survivor mode without even thinking about it. So you get by, and superficially people say you're doing well, but inside there's always this lack, this internal part of you that may be locked away in that box with a seal on it that you haven't dealt with. So I've always been aware of the need to go and get counselling, and particularly at times of different traumas and crises in my life, as we all face, it's just been really handy to have a person sitting opposite you in the room who you don't necessarily want to be there, but thank goodness they're there, and thank goodness they're a stranger, because they're not going to go and gossip about this. They're bound to not tell anyone, and that's such a relief that you can just open up and, unlock things that have been locked away for a long time. So I always tell journalists, if they're covering difficult stories, I find writing really, really handy. And so after a lot of the major stories I've done where there's been trauma, where I've been faced with trauma, I'll write something for a website. No one's got a website, so I'll just write an article about that. And it's so cathartic. It does release a lot of the sort of pent-up sadness. And that's better than just not doing something with it. But I still had the effects of, get back from some stories and you go quiet and you're a bit grumpy, a bit shitty, don't particularly want to go and see people. You do, you're finding what they're saying is a bit trivial. Because there's more important things. I've just come from this really big story, and that's really important. And if you do start talking about it, you're worried you're never going to stop. So that stops you talking about it.
Do you feel like losing your parents at that age, such a young age, shaped your identity?
I wish I could give a short answer, but I won't give a long
form.
That's true. Actually, there is a very simple way of putting it. You don't have a safety net. That to me is the bottom line. No one's coming to save you. I was fortunate that my brother and sister are 10 years older. So Dad died when I was 3, Mum died when I was 8. And so I spent a lot of my childhood with my brother and sister effectively raising me and my sister's husband. So I'm fortunate they were around. And even though I moved around a lot and between them, sometimes with other relatives, they were there. So I knew they were there. But it's not like your parents who are just going to be there through thick and thin, no matter what. So, it didn't have the safety net. So you just a duck. You just keep paddling, and there's no looking back. Never in my childhood did I ever think, oh, this is so sad, I've lost my parents. You're just too busy being a survivor, getting on, never reflecting on it.
Yeah.
Just living life, going to school, coming home, doing homework. I think the price... Of course, you pay some prices for that psychologically. One is a sense of distance with most other people, that I felt slightly distant. It was almost like I felt like I was born in a test tube. So I didn't have mum and dad around for most of my childhood. And so it took me a long time to learn how to just be myself around other people, just relax and be me, as opposed to what I thought they wanted.
No matter what, we're going to experience some sort of trauma in our life. And the extent and the spectrum to that differs depending on our life choices and our life experiences and where we're brought up in this world. And, if you and your family, if you're a family that's very abusive, you've got that trauma. If your family is brought up in Gaza, you've got, or Israel or a war zone, you got that trauma. If you choose to go to war, you're going to have those wounds and those traumas. And if you lose a parent, you've got those. And they're sort of big, capital T sort of traumas. But I don't know. For me, mine was my parents not being around very much physically. They worked really hard. And as a child, I didn't realize the effect that it would have on me later on in life. Now, my parents are the most supportive, beautiful, loving, caring parents. And in their eyes, they were doing all the loving, caring things by going, let's work really, really hard and provide our children with the opportunities that we didn't get growing up. They came out of here in the 50s as kids of Holocaust survivors. So they're carrying all sorts of genetic and epigenetic stuff themselves. But you don't know how you're gonna traumatize your kids. The fact is, they probably are in some way. And I'm not a parent yet. You guys are both parents. I don't think you can't wound your children in some way, whether or not it's because you're no longer here because of cancer or whatever it is, or just because you're working your ass off to provide for them. You never know how you're going to wound your kids, but to have kids who, like you guys, who went, I'm going to go and see someone. I think that is profound. So whatever they did, your parents, they raised two men who were prepared to be brave enough to self-inquire and to look at the stuff, whatever that stuff is. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's really, really profound. Yeah.
It reminds me of that famous, I can underquote the first line, the famous Philip Larkin poem, "Fuck you up, your mum and dad."
Yeah.
But the second line is as they were in turn.
As they were.
Yeah.
And the thing that is important, I think the most important thing is that for the majority of the world, even if you are going to therapy and your therapist within the first 3 minutes says, tell me about your relationship with your mother, like that you still love your mother. Regardless, you don't sit there and blame them for everything. That there's a realization that everyone's just doing their best with what they know. I asked you guys to bring in a couple of quotes, or a quote each. I'd love for you to share it. Mark, go ahead.
Mate, I thought of it on the way here, but it's one I've always loved, and pretty sure it's from The Dark Knight, but it's the night's always darkest before the dawn. And I think for me, it's a skill, I think, perseverance and just hanging in there. If you can do that, so many of life's problems eventually pass. So, yeah, just stick it out. And, the cloud's always clear when you're at your hardest moment, I think. So, yeah, I've always found a bit of hope in that quote.
I like that. Yep. Great.
My one's from Samuel Beckett. It's only recently I realised he'd said this. I knew Samuel Beckett. I love Waiting for Godot, one of my favourite plays. If you haven't seen it, yeah, it can seem pretty intense, but in fact, it's one of the funniest plays I've ever seen. But he wrote another one in a short story, which has become quite famous too. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. In other words, you're going to fail, but that's only because you tried. If you stop trying, yeah, you won't fail, but you won't get ahead. So I love that line, fail better. Learn from our failures.
Yeah, it reminds me of the arena quote by the one about the man in the arena. I think it's a Roosevelt quote, which is way too long for me to say, but previous guest a couple of weeks ago, Luke Darcy, who some people know, former footballer, he mentioned on it that the only person that you can really look at is the one inside the arena. That's the one, that's the one trying, whether they fail or whether they succeed. They're the one giving it a crack.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, don't. It's very easy not to fail if you don't try. Mark, you're back in Afghanistan in 2010. Situation's changed. Your thoughts about the war have changed. Tell me what you were feeling then.
So I went every year from 2006 to 2010, and by 2010, the surge forces that had been kind of laid out by the US president had arrived in country, and we were meant to be turning the tide of the war, but it just kept getting worse. All the efforts we were putting in were kind of amounting to just more violence and more casualties. And I think in 2010 we lost 10 or 12 soldiers in a couple of months. Like in the Australian Army, that's a lot. It's a lot in any time. But I just remember going to a lot of ramp ceremonies and a lot of people being dispatched home in bloody caskets. So I remember thinking, I think we've done our dash. I don't think this is going to get any better if we've thrown this at it. And I think the president put a 18-month timeline on it. I said, we're not going to get the result we're after. So So it was a hard realization because we'd given so much, but yeah, that's eventually what happened. It just took another 10 years for it to kind of unwind after that. So yeah, pretty unfortunate.
After that, we've seen what's happened with Afghanistan. How do you feel about everything that you put in, all those men and women put in, many, many nations? What's your feeling towards it?
My feeling is you've got to really be honest about it. I think a lot of Westerners and a lot of, especially politicians and people that are in the conflicts, have a lot of trouble assessing it realistically. And what we did is the Australian Army at least, I think we spent $8 billion. We lost 40 plus people and got 200 wounded and a lot of Afghans, and replaced the Taliban with the Taliban in 20 years. So it was a failure. And I don't appreciate people trying to dress it up as something else. It wasn't a success. And I think it's a disservice to the families of the people who died to try and dress it up like it was, we did a pretty good job and that's fine. I think it wasn't a success and you got to learn from it.
What are the learnings?
Well, the big one is how you set your mission for any overseas endeavour that involves military force. Like, what are you trying to achieve? What does success look like? Under what criteria do we stop doing what we're doing? None of that was clear, so we just kept kind of wandering along in a nameless conflict.
That was the one phrase that I read going into Iraq that I hadn't encountered before, but clearly is a very central part of military doctrine. What does victory look like?
Yeah.
You can't spell that out before combat. You're not going to figure it out afterwards.
Yeah, and there's been examples of this done well, like the first Persian Gulf War was a good example. It's like, we're going to liberate Kuwait. We're not going into Iraq. We're going to rout the Iraqi army and we're going to liberate the state, and that's it. And that's a very defined kind of endpoint, whereas we didn't have that in the second Gulf War and Afghanistan.
Do you ever feel like a puppet in someone else's agenda?
I didn't at the time, but now looking back, yeah, you think you've got a lot of agency, but that all the policy is determined by elected officials, and then it's run by the army. And by the time it gets to you, you're so far removed from both of those things that it's kind of, it's just you're doing your best with the directions you've been given and the orders you've been given. So I don't think they have as much agency as I didn't have as much agency as I maybe thought I did at that point.
I look back to those Gulf Wars. I sort of feel like, talking about the first one, that there was unfinished business still, and the second one felt like a son trying to clean up his dad's unfinished business. Maybe get a bit of oil along the way. Do you guys ever sort of look at like the experience that you're having or the experience you're reporting on and go, even since then, just go, I wish I just could behave in a more authentic way, tell in the way that I really feel, or operate in the way that really aligns with me. This is not aligned with me.
Yeah.
You go first, Mark. I'm curious.
I was just going to say I remember having that feeling but not knowing how to deal with it. And I think fear stopped me from kind of saying, hey, this isn't going to work. That fear of rejection or being cast out of your group. I think that's what stopped me from kind of acting, for sure.
As a journalist, you are tied to being as objective as you possibly can be. Really difficult in conflicts. You're literally in the middle of a conflict, so there's clearly two sides at least. But one of the toughest ones to cover, just in terms of public debate, was Israel-Gaza. Still going on. I'm staggered to say it's still going on. And in my time in Israel, my purpose was to get as many voices as I could, as much just to educate myself. I've been to Israel quite a number of times as a journalist, but each time I go, it's like a intensive education in Middle Eastern politics. And I wanted to get voices from the West Bank as well as in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. One place I couldn't get into, still can't get into, is Gaza. I'd love to be in there too. I don't want to be in a war zone, but I do want to go into there and hear those voices. And when I came out, it's then I realised the intensity of the debate about that particular conflict. It was more intense than any other conflict I've reported on. Like, I'm too young to have reported on Vietnam. Maybe it was like that, but this one it was like people wanted to pick a side and stick with their side. And it led to some arguments. I managed to, I've got to admit, I avoided a lot of arguments by just not commenting with friends who are going down a particular path. But I would just say that there are as many voices in the Middle East about this as there are voices in the Middle East. There are many different ways of looking at this conflict. It's not like you don't have to pick a side. You can admit that certain people are committing atrocities. Whoever's holding the gun, whoever's dropping the bomb, there are atrocities being committed. And that was a tough one because I was just trying to impart as much information as I could, but also as much context as I could. This is something that goes on. I've always found the Middle East the most fascinating in ancient culture and the most contemporary of contemporary cultures. And it's always been that way in my lifetime. What's going on there affects us now. It always has in my lifetime. And I want to keep reading about it. I want to keep talking about it. And I hate the way people try and turn it into their own cause, their own fight. That's so frustrating.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. So how many Western journos get to go into Gaza?
I don't know if any have yet. I think one that I know of.
This is what I'm sort of getting. I'm leading the horse to water here.
Yeah.
We're not getting the stories from Gaza about what's really happening there in Western mainstream media.
We're getting them from the point of view of people who are living in Gaza. Now, there's a whole other debate. Can people who are being, bombed give an objective viewpoint? I'm not sure that's the most important question to ask. My question is, are we hearing the voices of people, ordinary people, as opposed to people with a political axe to grind?
Yep.
And I feel like now one thing the smartphone has given us is more access to ordinary voices. So people can put stuff on Instagram or whatever. And it's unfiltered, mightn't be particularly accurate, but it's their perspective on things. So at least we can get that now. But I only know one journalist who's been in there from CNN independently. Others went in on Israeli military trips, but you're always extremely restricted in what you can see and how long you're there for, and you're not going to go. People aren't going to be very honest when you know about an Israeli military vehicle. They're hardly going to spill their guts out. So it'd be much better to allow open access, but still can't. And I still feel for me, that was the greatest unfinished business of my time over there, is that I couldn't get those voices. I could get Palestinian voices, but not those in Gaza.
Yeah. So this speaks to something I want to chat to you both about, is the discrepancy between what is happening and what you're reporting on, and the third party is the overarching agenda of what a society needs to see. Can you guys speak to that? Because you're in it, you're reporting on it, but we also are getting told a story that, for want of a better word, is manufactured to appeal to a certain narrative.
We would shape our own. We would try and shape the story to make it favourable to defence or make it easier for us to do our job. Whereas my perspective was, a journalist is trying to present a balanced point of view, which is far more in the public interest than having a military control what's in the story. And you don't realise this when you're in the army, because you think you're doing the right thing, but the public needs to know as much as they can about what's happening in what a military is doing overseas, and we would just not share it. We would just not share information. We'd say it's classified or whatever. We'd do anything we could to try and limit information release. When we did do it, we tried to do it on our terms. This is just what I observed as someone travelling with generals and watching what was happening on the ground, and then seeing what was being reported in the press. It stops debate or stifles debate around a really important topic. So journalists play a really important role, and I think being really aggressive as a journalist is important, because militaries will try and hide what's happening, and it's not because they're evil, it's just human nature. And that was my experience of it anyway.
Yeah, I must say the Australian military, from a journalist's point of view, is probably one of the most difficult to deal with. Not that they're aggressively difficult, but just to put up a brick wall, would let us in when there was something they wanted to publicise, come along for a trip. But in terms of just getting basic information out, I've always had more success with the British, the Americans. The Americans seem to have this more of an open door policy that individual soldiers could comment on camera in a way that Australian soldiers can't. And I think, and again, I want to hear from the people on the ground. It's fine to hear from the generals, but I want to hear from the people who are actually walking on patrol, that sort of thing.
Do you think that's partly because the US military, regardless of what they're doing, believe that they're saving the world?
It could be that. It could well be that. I think it's also part of the US culture.
I'm also thinking about Team America now, so that's just
It's also part of that US culture of freedom of speech, First Amendment, all that sort of stuff. That I feel like that gives more latitude than we're allowed here. And I'd rather, in terms of shaping the narrative, people assume, you media are always told what to report. I've never actually had that. I've always had the discussion about what's the most interesting thing to report, what's the angle today. But that's the battle most journalists face is what's the angle, what's the story that's going to be of most interest to most people, in my case, who watch Channel 9, which might be a different audience to those who read The Guardian or those who watch Channel 7, etc. So just trying to think of how can I make this of interest to the most people possible. Sometimes that leads to stories being sensationalised, probably too often.
Yep. I feel like that. I feel like we're getting more and more of that.
Well, there's more of an effort to try and draw eyeballs.
That's what I mean. So it's like how much of it is just what's going on? How much of it is like, can we want to watch 9 instead of 7 because they tell it in a more interesting way, or there's more sort of red on the screen with alert signs that that make it scream at us, and that penetrates to our innate sort of reptilian negative bias brain that wants to drive towards fear, and this is drawing people in. So just using fear to draw people in. So I often feel like that. I've turned off the news so much more, almost fully since COVID, because of how much fear narrative I was seeing.
Well, also it does create cynicism, which I think is what you're pointing to. That people just get overwhelmed if everything is, as you say, big red signs on the screen, everything's exclusive, everything's alerts. The words lose meaning. Yeah. And I've always been one about just keep some words in reserve. Some words are really precious, particularly after I went to Arche. I thought, please don't use the word tsunami unless you talk about an actual tsunami. Don't talk about a tsunami of flu cases this winter. No,
or the GWS Giants, the orange tsunami.
Just save some word. I mean, Holocaust, for example. There's only one context to use that word. So some things have to be kept in reserve as break glass only words for a really good reason. They've got to carry their weight.
Having seen firsthand what war looks like and feels like, and the suffering and atrocities and fragility of life, how does that change the way you see your life and those you love and how you go about your everyday life?
Precious. Just so precious. More than I'd ever realised. I took it for granted. But the fact we live in a country like this, for all its faults and all its wonders, that we can go about our lives safely every day without having to worry about someone with a gun running down the street shooting at us or rounding us up or putting us into prisons without proper authority. The fact that we can go into a polling booth and put down our vote and it's ticked off and everyone's vote's exactly the same. These are things we absolutely take for granted. And we should take for granted. Everyone should be able to do this sort of thing. And in most countries, people can't. And we're just so fortunate. It really makes me, I kind of get emotional about this at times. We have such a pleasant life in Australia compared to so many other parts of the world. That's the part of me that still want to grab people by the collar and say, look, you're complaining about roadworks. I get it. I get frustrated by roadworks too. You know what? These people who don't have roads and schools and hospitals, and we do. And isn't that great? Isn't that on its own? You're not going to pop champagne over it, but you can just think, how good to live in a country where these things are accepted for everybody and expected for everybody. So the one thing I take away is, it makes me feel that what we've got is precious, and I wish everyone else could share it.
Beautiful.
Same as what Brett said, it's actually what we've got in the country is not really the natural order of things. If you're a citizen here, you've won the lottery. So, I think we've got to work hard to preserve the kind of the functioning society that we've got, which is actually really safe and pretty open and democratic and all those good things. And I think we're really lucky to have it, because I've seen so many countries that don't, and life in those places is incredibly hard. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
What about for you personally? How does it change the way that you act in your day-to-day life?
Well, probably more to that point I was making earlier of saying, now that you've survived and now that you've got these opportunities in front of you, whether it's being a parent or doing something professional, you've got to do your best to try and do the best you can, as in take a risk. Don't be afraid of getting something wrong. Don't think small or act small. Try and find your potential. And yeah, I think for me that's been exciting and fun.
Both speaking to the idea of just dreaming big and daring to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's afraid of it, but no one's really watching anyway. You might as well have a go.
Yeah, love it. Mark and Brett, thank you so much for joining me. It was an incredible conversation. I so appreciate you taking the time.